So now in the scene I've got the XREF of just the cylinder part of the microphone, and we can start actually working and separating it out and doing stuff. Before I do that, I want to point out a couple things. Because I'm using scene XREFs as a way to manage my file, there's one problem that always comes up. A lot of people will go into, when they do a save, and they'll go, I want to, save as, and they'll hit this little button here which will incrementally save. But what will happen is now my next file will be O2 microphone XREF start 01, and then 02, and then 03. Well, my original scene file has an XREF scene that's looking for O2 microphone XREF start. And if that file name changes, it won't notice it. So what I'm actually using is a free script you can get on ScriptSpot from Martin Breet that's called incremental save. And basically you just do you can set it up on a hotkey, put it on your button, whatever you want, but when you save that way, what it'll do is it'll automatically, if one already doesn't exist, create a folder with the same name as your file, and it will take the existing file and rename it and put it inside of that folder, and then save your current file back down to the original name. So your current working file will always be the same name, and every save you have will incrementally be stored separately in that directory. So it's easy to roll back to all the different versions whenever you want to. But it works perfect when you're doing things like scene XREFs. So keep that in mind. So now let's just go through the quick process of doing something with this model. So I'm going to pick on the main cylinder portion of this, go to polygon mode, and I'm just going to quickly grab a bunch and detach. Grab another bunch and detach. Now normally I would be following nice naming rules and all that other stuff here, but in this particular case, because we're just working fast, I'm not going to worry about it. So there, we've detached all the stuff I want to detach. I can jump out of that level, and the next thing you want to do is start to worry about giving this object some thickness, because obviously it's just polygons at this point. So I'm just going to isolate one of these, and there you can see, as I said, infinitely thin. So we'll just go through here and grab the shell modifier, and so now we've got a bit of a thickness on it. I can now exit the isolation mode, and very quickly I can just drag and drop that shell onto the various pieces to give them each some thickness. So we'll say there, and we'll throw another one there. So they've all been shelled. Now I also have this little rim that's up here that I'm just going to attach to the top cylinder portion because I don't really need it otherwise. So again, I'll just collapse all, and then just go through here, hit attach, and pick on that. So now it's all one object. Back out of attach. So I've got the basics of my objects all set up now. Now what I want to do is create a hierarchy out of them. But before you get into anything to do with hierarchies, the first thing you want to think about is your pivot points. So you'll notice here, if I pick on all my objects, they all have the same pivot point because they've inherited the pivot from the original object they were separated from. So what I do is I'll just quickly go into the hierarchy tab, pick Effect Pivot Only, and just do a center to object. Pick the next one, center to object, center to object. And this is just good housekeeping. Make sure that your pivots are at least relatively the same for each object, something like so. Now I'm ready to start doing a hierarchy. So first thing though to note is kind of how this is all going to slide together. So each one of these slides into the next, and you'll notice shape size wise they kind of fit. This piece has to slide in though, and it's much bigger than the component underneath it. So I know I'm going to have to scale this down as it shrinks, which means I want to scale towards its bottom. So again, I'm going to go to Effect Pivot Only, and if I scaled where the pivot is now, the whole object would scale up and down towards its center. So what I'm going to do is simply move that pivot point down to its base, so now it scales down towards the bottom, just like so. And so now I'm ready to link everything together. So I'll just go in here and say link to there, link that to there, and link this to here. I'm going to treat this central piece as the parent object for the overall cylinder. So now I'm going to link this to here, and then this to here. And then I'll take this whole object and just link it off to my pivot post there. And then you might want to also go through at this point and just link your knobs to the objects that they'll actually be tracking as they're working. So now we've got our basic hierarchy set up. So now I can start to animate. So now at this point what we want to do is just go through and start animating. So I'm just going to select all the objects here. I'm going to make sure my default in-out tangent for my keys is set to linear because I want to have kind of a mechanical motion on it. And I'm just going to, with auto key on, hit key. So now I've got a set key that defines what this object looks like when it's complete. What you'll discover whenever you do animated creation stuff is that often the quickest and easiest way to do it is actually animate things coming apart or folding down, not getting to the final state. So I'm going to animate this in reverse and then later on flip it over. So what we're going to do now is just move forward 10 frames. Actually, let's go to 20 frames. We'll do it on 20s just for fun. And now I can go in here and scale down and move this in just like so and hit key. So there is that piece done. Now I can pick on the next one here, and again I'm going to set a keyframe there so that I know it's in position. And then we can go, say, 5 frames in, scale it down like so, again hit key, and we'll go to 40 frames and we'll just move it down just like so, and again hit key. Now I can pick the next piece and do the exact same thing. Key it, move forward 5 frames, scale it, say right about there, hit the key button, move forward to frame 60, so 15 frames forward, move down just like so. And if we just key that, you can now see we've got our animation for the top. Now I won't bother setting up the bottom because I can do that one very quickly after the fact, and you can just look at the finished file. But we will set up the Boolean as well now, so I'm just going to grab this Boolean object, slide it into here, pick on this, go to the create, and we're going to create primitives for compound objects, not Boolean, what am I saying? Pro Boolean. And now we're going to go and just start picking, and I'm going to pick that object, and you can see now I've got the hole in my object for me to work with later. So I can kill the start picking and jump out. So that's the basics of doing the animation for the fundamental objects here. Alright, so here we have the next step in this project. I've taken the same scene we were just working with and just finished the animation of the pieces telescoping in and out. So now if we go in here and select, you can actually see that over time it collapses down to a little disc. Now of course we actually want it reverse of that, so what I'm going to do is just select everything, go to timeline, get the track view, and instead of being in curve editor mode, I'm going to go to a mode that a lot of people don't use, surprisingly enough, which is called dope sheet mode. So now I'm seeing the ranges of animation that are happening on the various objects. I can select all of those objects, and I want to say the thing I'm about to do next, I want you to affect all of the child keys of these tracks and all of the subtrees, so any hierarchy underneath, so all the plus things there, everything that's underneath. So now I can go and say I want to select time, select that whole range right there, and we can delete time, we can reverse time, we can scale it, and we can insert it. In this case, I want to reverse it. So now that it's reversed, you can see everything actually happens in the right order now. Now while I'm at this, I'm going to select the entire animation time range and just slide it down to around frame 25. Just gives us a little room for some other stuff we want to do. So now if I go and pick on this object, another thing we want to do is animate that Boolean. So I'm just going to go into my operands, and the nice thing about Booleans at any time you can go in and get access to the original pieces that made it. So here you can see there's my original microphone cylinder and my volume knob Boolean. So I can pick on that, and now it gives me access to the cylinder and all of its settings. So what this means is I can now say, okay, at, let's say, rate around frame 65 is where we're going to have the hole start to open up. So notice that my original radius is 0.43. So what we're going to do is we're now going to turn on auto key, set this to 0, and at around 65 I'm just going to click up down, just make a little key for it, and then by 80 we'll make this 0.43. So now we have that hole opening up and the knob can come out. So that's useful and quick and convenient. Now, the next thing we want to deal with though is how everything actually appears. So all the objects that are inside this main ring, I'm just going to use a visibility track to make invisible on frame 0, and at some frame they all appear. And because I'll coordinate my camera motion so that when they appear I'm looking at it kind of edge on so I don't see them suddenly pop into appearance, it should work out just fine. But it still leaves me with what do I do to deal with this external ring. That becomes a bit of a difficulty. You can't just have it fade in or pop on you. So I want it to create in a ring, just kind of run around the object. So I'm going to do this in a different way than most people normally expect. You'll see here I've got a rectangle shape that I've put in the viewport. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go in and say I want to lathe that. Just like so. And you see it's 360 lathe, but it's around its center, so it kind of creates this cylinder. Well, if I go in and say I want to lathe around an axis that is aligned to this object, now the lathe goes all the way around, and I can adjust the number of degrees the lathe happens. So this is going to be a cutter object that I'm going to use. So let's just kind of dial it down. Let's just set this as a keyframe now. So we'll just go Auto key, move forward to frame 20, and we'll set it to 0. So that basically, in that period of time, does that. Now, what am I going to do with this? Well, I could do a Boolean, so I could Boolean this off of the cylinder, and that way, over time, the animation would allow me to expose this underlying object based on it being Booleaned away by this. Booleans are great and all, but they take a lot of processing power, and I want to have a fair bit more interactivity in viewport than that might allow. So I'm going to do this in a completely different way. I'm going to go pick on this object, and I'm going to go grab a volume select. This allows me to select objects, vertices, or faces based on a space. So I'm going to say I want to select based on faces, and I'm going to select based on a mesh object, and I'm going to pick my lathe. So now you can see in there, as I move the frame slider, there's a selection that's happening underneath. Now I can pass that selection up to another modifier. In this case, I'm going to pass it up to a delete mesh. So now as that slides along, it'll expose the object, because when the lathe is fully around it, it's deleting everything because it's selecting all faces. As it reduces the amount of lathe, you get more faces exposed. Now the one problem with this is if you look closely, and you may be able to see it here, there is no end cap on this. It's actually just a big hole at the end. So what you do is you pass down another mesh select, which basically turns off all the selections inside of the object, and then you can throw a cap holes on it. It'll find all holes and cap them. And once you've done that, you can now take this object and simply hide it like so, and now voila, this piece exposes itself. So now we need to make all of these pieces go away. So to do that, I'm actually going to select all the pieces on the top, and normally what you do is you go into track view, and inside of track view, if I click on here, you can go into tracks and you can go to visibility tracks and you can add them. But this is only something you do on an object by object basis one at a time. So if you had hundreds of objects, it's really annoying to do, especially if you want them all sequenced together. I could write a script to do it, which again, I'd rather not have to do if I don't really need to. So the quick and easy way to deal with this is actually in object properties. So what we're going to do is decide which frame this all becomes visible, and I'm going to say it's going to be frame 25 myself. So I'm going to right click on the objects at frame 0. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to turn on Auto key, and I'm going to change the in and out tangent because I don't want these objects to fade into visibility. I want them just pop they're on a certain frame. So I'm going to change my key type to step. So now it'll stay at 0, and then when I say be fully visible, it'll just pop to that. So now I can right click on those objects, go to object properties, set my visibility to 0, and turn off inherit visibility. If inherit is on, then the parent object of all these pieces will always control their visibility regardless of what is said here. So you want to make sure you turn off inherit visibility. So those objects have now vanished. Now what I do is I slide forward in time to frame 25, right click on them again, object properties, and simply set my value back to 1. Just like that. So now there's a point at which they suddenly become visible. I can slide this a little further along, and just to make sure you caught the idea, I can select all the components on the bottom and do the exact same thing. Go to frame 0, right click, object properties, set it to 0, and I'm doing this setting to 0 just by right clicking on the spinner, always sets it to 0. Turn off inherit visibility, say OK. Slide along to frame 25-ish, right click again, object properties, set it to 1, and hit OK. So now one of the things I want you to notice, this is kind of an unusual thing, is sometimes the objects won't actually go invisible. So let me just hide that for now so you can actually see all works fine. But if I back up, some of them didn't go invisible. Well, they actually are. If you did a render, these would be invisible. But the problem is Max's viewport seems to not always notice a change from visible to invisible unless there are other actions happening on the object to trigger it. So a keyframe that says move or rotate or scale or something like that to kind of trigger an update of the viewport. So if this is happening to you, one, you could just jiggle the object and it'll actually go away. Or if you go to the very end frame and just step forward one frame to bring you back to 0, it'll trigger all the updates and everything will be invisible. But remember, at a render time, it still is actually invisible. Mental note. So that's just a really quick setup of animating all those pieces. The last thing I want to do is animate the knob coming out of the hole, and I'm going to do that slightly differently than just simply sliding it out. Okay, so to animate the knob coming out from the cylinder, we're going to do this slightly differently. I could simply animate this coming in a nice linear fashion out, but I don't really like that idea. I'd rather it, do something interesting and maybe kind of have a bit of a bloop to it. You need a sound effect sometimes for some of these things. So what we're going to do is just select the object it's coming out of and the knob itself, and I'm just going to isolate that selection. That way we're not dealing with any other complexities. And first I could go in and decide, okay, what's my animation going to look like? But right off the top, what I'm going to do is first set up a deformation on this. So again, instead of a linear motion, I'm going to throw on a freeform deformation control. So we can just, where it's open, there it is there. I can go in, go to create, space warps, geometric deformable, and I want a freeform deformation cylinder, and I've set it to auto grid so it'll build itself right on the face that I'm starting with. And we'll just do that, and then pull that out into distance, just like so. And now I can move this around a little bit, and I'm going to make some adjustments to it because it's a little big. So I'll radius it down just a touch, like so, and we'll set the number of points. This should actually be 5, this can be 2, and in length I want it to be 8, something like so. And then we'll change the overall height of it to give us a little more to work with, and I'll slide it this way. So we've got our basic starting point. Now I'm going to go into the control points and pick all of these points, scale, and I'm only going to scale on the Z and Y axis in this particular case, and we'll make it very, 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 very small, like so. Now in order to see what's going on here, I really need to bind my space warp to my object. So I just do that and bloop. Now you can see I have made it incredibly small right there. And if I go in here and pick on just this object and move it, it appears. So what I want to do though is actually shape this a little bit more. So it'll go up here, but now let's grab those points. Go to control points. Let's grab these points here, and we'll scale those up ever so slightly, just like so. And then we'll grab these points here and we'll scale them down ever so slightly, just like so. And let's use that as our starting point. We'll probably have to tweak it a little bit ultimately to get what we want, but it'll give you an idea. So I'm just going to turn on auto key now, jump out of here, and we can decide, okay, at what frame should my object be moving? So the circle itself starts to open up right there. So right around 70, we'll set a key. And then right around 85, I'll slide it out to right about there. Even a little bit further, just like that. And now at the same time, I'll take this object and set a key for it, and around 85, slide it in, like so. And now all you have to do is start to adjust the timings of things. And you can see still not quite right, so I'm going to take both objects and actually take their animation and slide them out a little bit further so we get a little bit more of a hole. And then this object here, I'm going to make happen a little bit quicker. So I'm just going to slide the frame slider like so. Zoom. And what that should give me now is just a bit of a pop to the overall piece. And you can see here we've actually got some extra animation that I can just get rid of by hitting delete. There we go. So very quickly you can start to create your final effect, and in this case I'll load up the last piece just so you can see what the ultimate piece was. And now if we slide through, again, that appears, that appears. Now notice the button kind of pops out, grows, shrinks, and settles. So it just gives a nice little organic pop on top of everything else that we're doing. So now we've finished the base cylinder for the microphone. Now we're going to move on to the stand that it all sits on.